Hello, Shalom, and welcome to a set of 3 videos on the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments, as we know, are foundational to modern society, so that they repay study, and studying them in their original Hebrew is all the more valuable. Now, these lessons don't particularly assume any prior knowledge of Hebrew. I'll explain things, although obviously not everything, so you'll benefit more if you do have prior knowledge, and I've prepared a graded video series that you could look at. But if you don't have time to do that, there will be some benefit at least from joining me now as we look in detail at the 10 Commandments in the original Hebrew as Moses recorded. V'yedaber Elohim את כל הדברים האלה לאמור, אנוכי יהוה אלוהיך אשר הוצאתיך מארץ מצרים מבית עבדים. So these are the opening words. This is Exodus chapter 20. Now this is and, this is he, and daber is spoke. This form of the verb is called piel, and it's also called the imperfect. Now the piel often means that it's causing something or a decisive action, and the imperfect usually means that it's not completed, but in this case it's actually converted. In grammar they say it's converted by the wow in front, so that converts it to the past tense. So we translate, and God spoke. Notice the typical Hebrew order: verb first and then subject. And note also, of course, that in Hebrew we read from right to left. So it says, and God spoke. Now, this little word here, we don't translate it into English, but it indicates that the next thing to come is the object. In other words, the things that God spoke. And here's the object: kol, all, hadvarim, the words. And this im is the common Hebrew plural ending. Not every Hebrew word is made plural with im, but many, particularly of the masculine gender, hadvarim. So here we have davar as a verb, and here it's a noun. He spoke the words, these, to say. Now there's le at the beginning. The first approximation translation of it is to, but here it's just the typical saying. This is usually translated in more literal versions, like the King James Version and others down to today. He spoke these words saying. The same idiom carries over into the Greek of the New Testament, and so it's often used to introduce words. In English, we don't normally, in normal English, we wouldn't say it. We just say, and God spoke these words, and then quote marks, and we begin. So perhaps you could say this is equivalent to quote marks, because these ancient manuscripts didn't have punctuation. So here we are. Yeah, and in Hebrew, the 10, what we call the 10 Commandments, are the 10 words. And in the Greek translation, the Septuagint, that becomes decalogos, as we read in Deuteronomy 10:4. So that's why in English we sometimes call them the Decalogue, coming from the Greek decalogos, 10 words. Hebrew does have a word specifically for commandment, mitzvah, but it's not used here. We'll see it in verse 6. And according to the NIV Study Bible Notes, Devar is also a technical term for covenant stipulations in the ancient Near East. So what we're having here, the introductory part here, is all in line with the typical pattern in the ancient Near East of a covenant between a people and their king, or a people and their God. There are various other versions of the Ten Commandments and references to them in the rest of the Old Testament. Notice especially Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 6 to 21 and Deuteronomy 27 15 to 26, and also Exodus 34 17 to 26. So this is verse 2, and it continues the ancient Near East covenant form, with the great king first identifying himself and then outlining his previous acts on behalf of the people. I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you, and this verb form is what's called a hefil. It begins with an H, and again it's talking about a causing action. I caused you to come out. I brought you out from the land of. There's no of actually in Hebrew. This is what's called the construct form. And instead of using a word of in the middle, often this first word will be changed a little bit in form to show that it's joined to the next word, the land of Egypt. And here's the same thing here, from house of slaves. Again, there's the im plural, and this word here, Baith, has been shortened a little bit. Normally it's Baith, but it's been shortened to Baith, showing that it is, I should have written of there, showing that it's in construct with the next word, the house of slaves. There's one more point to mention here. This, your God, this suffix here is masculine singular. So in English, your could be singular, plural, any number, masculine or feminine, but Hebrew has different forms of you and your for feminine and masculine, and then also for singular and plural. And so this one is masculine singular, and that's the commandments all the way through are addressed in masculine singular. But ladies, you're not let off. This is man as embracing woman, as my old theology teacher used to say. Here we are, verse 3 and 4. Lo yehye lecha Elohim acharim al panaya. Lo tagese lecha pesel. We're called Temuna asher b'shamayim mimaral, wa asher ba'aretz mitachath, wa asher b'mayim mitachath la'aretz. So, not will be, again this indicates the imperfect, which is normally translated, well, first approximation translated in English as will. And here is the, this is actually a combination of two words. The le is two or four, and the cha at the end indicates you. Elohim acharim, again this is the plural. I haven't indicated it there. Other, again this is plural before my face. So all but two of the commandments are negative, telling the people what not to do. And the most normal way to do a negative command in English would be don't. Don't go there. But the normal way in Hebrew is to use the imperfect, which, as I said, first approximation is translated will, and the not. So that's why in the King James Bible and in many other translations you get thou shalt not. So the King James used shalt, which is evidently an old form of shall. Thou shalt not have any other gods. Probably because, I'm not sure that that was ever the normal way to say it in English, but perhaps because we had the imperfect here. But even shall is rare in modern English, and then mostly just in British English. Yeah, like I say, the simplest way to say it in English is simply don't have any other gods. In my dialect of English I could also use must. You must not have any other god. In fact, I think this is enough, which more or less covers this last phrase as well. So Alpenai means, the first approximation means upon, but here it basically means before, before my face. So that is like saying, don't have any other gods in front of me or in my sight. Well, of course, in God's sight is everywhere. So probably in normal English we'd say, don't have any other god. Just putting a little bit of emphasis on it. So in that case we're capturing this last bit by putting the emphasis, you must not have any other god. The Septuagint, the early Greek translation, uses the word plain, which means except or besides. The same with Syriac and a couple of Jewish Targums. So they're saying, don't have any other god except me. So it's a slightly different reading, but in the end it comes down to the same meaning. And again, here we have, I haven't had enough room to put in the translation here, so I'll just do it orally. Lo tarese, so this is make, not will you make for you, for yourself. Hebrew doesn't have a reflexive pronoun yourself, so they just say for you. But if we were translating it into English, we'd probably need to use the reflexive pronoun. Don't make for yourself an image, or well, this is the term for the old-fashioned graven image or molten image, cast image in metal. We're called temuna, so this is image or likeness. So this is and call all, usually means, the first approximation is all, but in this case we'll probably translate it in English by any, because in English the word any gives a subtle little distinction, and it's more appropriate here, or any image which in the heavens. So this bit says in, again this is the plural ending, this is in. In fact, this is not plural, this is actually a dual, and you can, this vowel here tells you that it's a dual. Bashamayim, mayim, tells you that it's a dual. But the Hebrew word for heaven is always in the dual, and it's translated often by the singular as here in the Septuagint. In heaven, and me means from, magal means above, and which in or on the earth, me from below, and which in the waters, from below to the earth, from below to the earth. So nothing created can represent God, as John Durham says in his Word Biblical Commentary on Exodus. There's an interesting point. Numa, the first king of Rome after Romulus, also forbade the Romans to represent God in any form of man or beast, nor was any painted or graven image of a deity admitted amongst them for the space of the first 170 years, all of which time their temples and chapels were kept free and pure from images. To such base objects they deemed it impious to liken the highest, and all access to God impossible except by the pure act of the intellect. And that's what the Roman writer Plutarch said in his life of Numa, the first king of Rome after Romulus. So he's saying that when the Roman Republic was first founded, they also had the purity of worship with no images. It was only after 170 years that images and idols crept into the Roman worship. But here is this pure and high ideal expressed in the Ten Commandments and kept by Israel. Mostly, as you can see, they have a reading in the Old Testament, they have a bit of a checkered history, but always, if they fell away, a prophet would come and pull them back to the pure original worship that is stipulated here in the commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verse 4. Lo tishtachwe lahem velo taravdem ki anochi Yahweh Elohecha Elkana poked awon avot al banim al shileshim ural riberim le son av. Le son I. That's a Y. Le son I. And notice the difference. This character here, when it's got the dot on this side, it's pronounced like S. When it's got the dot on this side, it's pronounced like Sh. We're going to say Hesed, le Elafim, le Ohvei, ou le Shomrei Mitzothei. Okay. So here we have it again, the same form, not, and the imperfect. So this again is la, which is 2 or 4. Hem is you plural. Them plural. So it's saying you will not worship them, to them, and you will not serve them, because Anochi, I again, Yahweh, Elohecha, Elkana. So this is a jealous God. We have a problem here because the English word jealous is totally negative, whereas the corresponding Hebrew word was not. There's an article in the Bible Translator magazine that pointed this out, and they suggested the CEV translation is preferable. I am the Lord your God, and I demand all your love. But I note that Augustine said, talking about God's anger, said that God's anger involves no mental perturbation on his part. We could say along the same lines that God's jealousy is pure, no mental perturbation. Like, say, I would be jealous of, say, another man dancing with my wife or something. But in the ancient world, this was a feature of their religion, and the Romans feared the vindictive, nasty jealousy of their gods. And they often said if someone gets rich or becomes famous, the gods will strike him because they don't like it. They get jealous. So there really is petty jealousy. But in this case, in the case of Yahweh, your God, it's not petty jealousy, but it's pure jealousy, concern for his people who have fallen away. The consequences are going to hurt them as well. So this poked, so this is calling you to account for. The King James Version said visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the sons. But visiting in the sense of like bringing it home to you, or calling you to account for. So upon their sons, to the third and the fourth generation. The word generation is not in the Hebrew, but it's understood. To the third and the fourth generation. To, and this is a participle, those who hate. So it means to those who hate me. And another translation suggested to those who reject me. So this seems a little bit unfair to individualistic modern Westerners, but in traditional society the family stands or falls together. But also there are several places in the Old Testament where it's said that people die for their own sins and not for their fathers. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 6. So the Bible teaches both communalism and individualism, and each play a part in the complexity of human relationships. But anyway, here's verse 6, which is a little better news. And vase, again a participle doing. Now, chesed, this is a very important word, first of all in the covenant context, so it could be translated as covenant loyalty. Covenant loyalty to the covenant made, but it also could mean mercy or kindness, and its traditional translation is loving kindness, but perhaps the best corresponding word in modern English is just kindness. To thousands. So here we had the sin coming down to the third and the fourth generation, but here we see God's love and mercy extending for 1,000 generations, effectively forever. Effectively forever. To those who love me, and to the keeping ones, and again this is in construct relationship. Otherwise we would have an em at the end for the plural, but the em drops out to join these two in, it's not, this is kind of functioning like a noun. It's from the verb shomer, and here is the word commandments, my commandments. That was not used in verse 1 where it just said words, but here is the specific Hebrew word for commandments. So verse 6, that's a good note to conclude, a good positive note. God's kindness effectively is forever to those who love him and keep his commandments.